Hey friends, so now we're going to talk about something very important in Python. We have the conditional statements, if, else, if. Those stuff are really important because we have to make our code smart and make decisions. That's why you're gonna end up using them like almost in each Python script you write. So let's dive in. Okay, so now what is conditional statements? It is very simple. It is like a checkpoint in your code that's gonna check a condition. If the condition is true, it's gonna run special block of code, but if the condition is false, it will skip it. So it's like you are making a decision inside your code. So we have only those two options. Either we're gonna run the code or not. Think about it like the traffic light. If it is red, you stop. If it is green, you go. So the rule is very simple, and this is exactly what we can do in coding. Normally our code, it's like straight line from start to end, but with the conditional statements, we can make like a question or a checkpoint, and based on the answer, if it is true, then you go to the right and do something, but if it is false, then you go to the left and do something else. So with that, we can cover multiple scenarios, and based on the data, we go either left or right. So now, my friends, there are like multiple forms of the conditional statements, and we're gonna start with the basic form, with the easiest one, and then we're gonna do it step by step until we reach the advanced one. So let's get started. Okay, so now let's start with the first level, the most basic form of the conditional statement, the if statements, where we have only one single condition. So the if statement is where everything starts. We use it in order to define the first condition, the first question. Now, in order to understand how things works, we're gonna have a visual chart. So let's check this. All right, now we always start at the top where our program begins, and then we say we want to build now a question where we use inside it a Boolean expression in order to have a condition. So it is like a question, and the answer for that is gonna be either true or false. So either yes or no. Now, if the condition is true, we're gonna have like a piece of code that's gonna assign the value A. So that means Python has to do something if the answer is true. But in the other side, if the answer is false, Python has to do nothing, completely skip everything and jump to the end. Now, in order to build this kind of question or checkpoint, we use the conditional statement if. So this is the most basic form of the conditional statements, where we say if the condition is true, then run the code. But if the condition is not true, then skip it. So now let's have an example in order to see how Python can execute it. Let's say that we are evaluating the score of the students and we want to give them grades. So we can go and build a question or a condition like this. If the score of the student is greater or equal to 90, then this student gonna get the grade of A. Okay, so now let's have this example where we have a very good student with a score of 100. So now Python gonna go and check it. Is 100 greater or equal to 90? Well, the answer for that is yes, it's true. So now what's gonna happen? Python gonna go and take the right path and execute it. So we're gonna go to the code block where we assign the grade to A. And after that, Python gonna jump out immediately to the end. Now let's have another student with a score of 80. So now Python gonna go to the checkpoint and compare the values. Well, this time it is not fulfilling the condition because 80 is not greater or equal to 90. So it's gonna fail, and Python has to go to the false path. So that means this time Python didn't execute the block of code. We skipped it and actually nothing happened here. So that's it. This is how the single if statement works. So all what you are saying, if this is true, then do something. If not, just skip it. It is very simple, right? So now in Python, we have always to understand the rules of using something. So now let's say that we have like two blocks of code, and in between we put our if statements. The rules are here that we can use only one if statements for each chain. So we cannot go and add multiple if statements. It's only one. The second rule, it must always come first. So the first thing that we do is to define the if statements. We will understand this later as we progress. And it is required, it is not optional. So if you are building conditional statements, you must always include if. You cannot skip it. And it can stand alone, so you can have only if statement like this without any other statements. Okay, so now let's go and create a variable like the scores and add to it a value 100. Now in my code, I would like to go and ask a question about this value. And based on the results, Python has to do something. So in order to do that, we use the conditional statement if. And after that, we have to add the condition, or let's say the Boolean expression. So we're gonna say if the score is greater or equal to 90, then Python has to do something. So far, what do we have? We have the Boolean expression, we have the if statements, and after that, we have to do an action if this is true. Now, in order to do that, we have to go and add the double points. This is something a lot of beginners forget to add. Just don't forget your double points after the condition, and after that, go and hit enter. Now, we're gonna write what Python has to do if the condition is true. So I'm gonna say go and print A. And now you might say, wait, the format is really ugly. Why do we have like spaces at the start? So let's go and remove them. And immediately you will see everything is red and there is like something is wrong. Well, because my friends, you cannot do that. You have to go and put spaces before the print. And those two spaces at the start, we call them indentations. They are, my friend, part of the syntax in Python. So that means, my friend, you have to be pixel perfect in order to do those stuff in Python. So let me explain for you what are those. And now, my friend, if you want to master all the aspects of Python, including if-else statements with a learn by doing approach and many hands-on exercises, I really recommend here Data Camp's Python Data Fundamentals track. The indentation means that you add spaces or tab at the start of a line so that you help Python to understand which lines belongs together. So now if you are looking to the second line to the print, you see it is like pushed to the right side using 4 spaces. And with that, Python can understand the second line actually belongs to the first line. So that means Python cannot go and immediately like print the A. It has to consider first the if statements. If everything is fine, Python can go and print the A. And the same thing if you have like a second print, let's say great job. So that means both lines of the print are intended under the if. So they're gonna run only if the condition is true. And if you don't do that, you will get an error. And the indentation is not something special only for the conditional statement if. It is how Python defines the blocks of code. So you have to use it as well for the other stuff, like defining a function or using the for loop. You can see in all those scenarios, we have to add the indentants in order to make it clear for Python which code belongs to which one. So with that, we can see the print A belongs to the if statements, and print hello with the name, it belongs to the definition of the function, and the print loop with the I, it belongs to the for loop. So you have to do this in different scenarios. And as well in Python, we can nest stuff inside each other's. So for example, here we are defining a function, and after it, we have the conditional statements. So with that, we have 3 levels. The top level is without any indentants or spaces, where we have the definition of the function. The second level, then after that, we have the first level inside the function, we have the if else, and then inside the if and inside the else, we have a second level where we have the prints. And again, we can organize this using spaces, so you have to be pixel perfect here. So if you look to this as blocks, the whole if belongs to the definition of the function, as well the else, so both of them are the same level, and the first print, it actually belongs to the if statements, and the second print belongs to the else statements. So each time you add 4 spaces or indentants, you are introducing a new level of nesting. And if you know any other languages like Java, JavaScript, there as well we have if-else statements, but we use their brackets in order to mark the start and the end of a block. So in Java and JavaScript, there are no rules about the indentations, it's only styling, but the indentations in Python, it is part of the rule and the syntax. Of course, if you compare now Python with the other languages, you can see it is easier to read with the Python. We don't have to go and add the brackets. The space is going to control the structure of our code, but still you have to be careful as you are adding spaces to your code that has a meaning for the interpreter of Python. Okay, now we are back. Now, as you can see, we have here only 2 spaces, but if you are following the standards of styling in Python, the pip8, you have to add 4 spaces or a tab. So I really recommend you to follow this rule from now on. We add 4 spaces. So now either you go here and add like 2 spaces in your visual codes, or you can configure the Visual Studio in order to add always 4 spaces automatically. So now in order to do this, we have to go to the commands, Ctrl-Shift-P, and then go and search for something called preferences preferences, open user settings, JSON. So this one over here. And now don't panic, we're gonna get like the settings in JSON format. Of course, things might look different at your side, but what we're gonna do, let's go to the ends, just add here at the ends like a comma, and then we have to place this piece of code. So now we are saying here, only for Python, go and add 4 spaces for the indentations. So now after that, go and save it, and then restart the Visual Studio Code. So now if you go back to your code and remove this, we go back to the double points. If you go and hit enter, you will get your 4 spaces immediately. And with that, you are following the best practices. Now we can go and say print A. Okay, so that's all about the indentations. Now let's focus on the conditional statements. So again, this code belongs to the if statements and gonna be executed only if this condition is true. So now let's go and try this out. You can see we are getting A because the score is higher than or equal to the 90. But now if you go and make something 50, and execute it. So as you can see, we don't have anything in the output. There is no print because the condition is not fulfilled. It is false. And with that, Python is ignoring totally this line. So it's like we are locking this line of code. Python gonna access it only if the condition is true. So it is very simple. That's all. Okay, so now let's move to the next form. We have the two-way decision using else statements. The else statement runs a block of code if the answer of the condition is false. So that means we can use it in order to do something if all the conditions are not fulfilled. Let's have a simple visuals in order to understand it. All right, now by looking to this again, you can see that for the false path, we are not doing anything. So only thing's gonna happen if the answer is true. Now what we can do, we can go and add a block of code to be executed on the false path. For example, we can go and assign the grade if the answer is false. So now in order to do that, we have to use the conditional statement else in order to have it on the false path. So now again, let's have this example. The student has a score of 100. So Python gonna go and ask, is 100 greater or equal to 90? Well, the answer for that is true, and Python gonna go to the right side and gonna go and assign the A grade for the student. And after that jumps to the end. But now if the student has the score of 80, Python gonna go and check it and it's gonna fail the condition. So now this time we don't have only if, we have now an else. So Python will not go immediately and jump to the end. Python first has to do something in the false path. So it's gonna go and execute the block of the else statement by assigning the grade to F and then jump out to the end of the chain. So now if you look at this, we have now two-way decision. All what we are saying here, if this is true, do this, else do that instead. And by the way, very important to understand, there will be no scenario where we're gonna go and execute both of the codes. So either left or right. So with this, we have now more options to our code. Okay, so now let's check the rules for the else statements. Well, first it must come at the end. It is always the last thing that can happen inside our chain. And it's very important, it does not contain any conditions. So it's not like the if or the else if statements. So nothing to be checked. It is optional, so you can go and skip it. You don't have always to have an else. But on the other side, it cannot stand alone. It always needs an if. So it makes no sense to have only else. And the last one, you cannot have multiple else statements in the same chain. So it's like the if, you can use only one else. So of course, we can understand this as we practice. Okay, back to our same example. So as you can see, we are not getting anything here because we are not fulfilling the condition and nothing gonna happen. Now, if you go and add an else, it is very important that you have to add it at the same level as the if, so without any indentations. So here we have to go and add as well double points. But as you can see, between the else and the double points, we don't have any condition. Now we can do the same thing. We can hit enter. And again, we have our 4 spaces because this block of code belongs to the else. So print if, and actually that's it. So now let's go and execute it. So we can see we are getting if at the output, and that's because we are not fulfilling the condition. So that means Python is not executing this print. Python has to jump to the else statement and execute the second print. But now if you go and fulfill the condition, let's say we have 95 and execute. And with that, you are getting A, and that's because we are fulfilling the condition and Python is executing its print. And of course, since this worked, Python can ignore completely the else statements here. Python will not do anything about this section. So again, about the rules, you cannot have the else statement as like standalone. If you go and execute it, you will get an error. So else always needs an if statement at the start. And of course, it is optional, so if you remove it, your code gonna work. So it is not must, you don't have always to go and include an else, and it has always to be at the end of your block. You cannot go and switch it like to have else and then if, you will get errors. So first if and then else. You have to follow the orders, my friend. And of course, you cannot go and add any condition after the else, you will get an error. So else and then afterward immediately the double points. As you can see, it is very easy. Okay friends, now let's keep moving, let's keep adding stuff. Now we're gonna talk about the multi-condition statements using Elif statements. The Elif statement, it is short of else if. We use it in order to add a new follow-up question if the result of the previous question was false. Now, as usual, in order to understand what this means, we're gonna have a visual chart. Now, look at this again. We have only one question and two ways. But of course, in real projects, things get more complicated and you have to ask more than one question. But now the big design decision is where we're gonna put this condition. So when we're gonna ask this question? Well, we have four options for different scenarios. The first one, we can take this question and put it on the left side. So if the answer for the first question is false, we ask a follow-up question. And in order to do that, we have dedicated conditional statement called else if. Or you say, you know what, let's move this question to the right side. So if I get a true from the first question, I want to ask a follow-up question. Well, for that, we don't have like special conditional statements. We have to reuse the if statement. And with that, we are building something called nested if. Now to the third option, what we can do with that, we can ask this question together with the first question. And if you remember in the Boolean expression, if you want to connect two conditional statements, we have to use the logical operators and or. So this is something that could happen a lot. Now, if you look to this, you can see that we are moving this condition like inside our chain. But what we can do, we can ask this question completely outside of this chain. So after the first chain is completely done, we go and ask our second question. So completely outside. And we call this independent ifs. We're going to learn about that later. So now let's start with the first one. We're going to put our question on the left side. So after we get false from the first question, we're going to ask the follow-up question using the else if. Now let's say that we're going to add another check where we are asking, is the score of the student is equal or greater than 80? And of course, each question, each condition has two ways. So if it is true, we have to do something. If it's not, we have to do another thing. Now, in this example, if it's true, then let's say we assign the grade B. And if it is false, then we go to the else statement. Now, as you can see, we are extending our chain and we are adding more scenarios. Let's have an example. If the student has the score 100, so Python gonna ask the first question, is 100 greater or equal to 90? Well, yes, it is true. That's why Python gonna go to the right side and execute the block where the grade is equal to A. And after that, it's very important, it's gonna jump immediately out of the chain. So it's gonna go immediately to the end and everything on the left side gonna be ignored. So that means we are not asking the second question. And this is exactly how things works with the conditional statements. Once you get the first true, the code that belongs to it gonna be executed and then go out. So nothing else, no other questions gonna be asked. Now let's have another score. We have 85. So Python gonna go to the first condition. It's gonna fail because it is less than 90. And now Python has to go and ask the second question. Is 85 greater or equal to 80? Well, it is true. And now Python gonna go to the right side and assign B to the student. And as well, it's gonna go immediately to the end. Now let's have another score, the 50. So it's gonna fail the first question because it is less than 90. So we go to the left and now we ask the second question. Well, it's gonna fail as well. It is less than 80. That's why Python gonna go to the false path and execute the else. So our student gonna get if at the end. So now by looking to this, our code has three ways, three scenarios. The one where the first question is true, another one where the first question is false, but the second is true, and the last one where everything is false, none of the condition is met, and the else is executed. And now it looks really nice if you compare the conditional statements. You can see if and else if, both of them has question, has condition, but with the else, we don't have here any question, any condition. It's something that has to be done. And as well, you can see with the else, it's like a fallback, a backup. If none of the above is true, then we have to execute the else. So it is the fallback scenario and we use it in order to give default values. Okay, so now what are the rules for the else if? So the first rule is about the position. It comes always after the if statement. So you cannot have it before it. Well, the second thing is not a rule, it's something nice. You can use as many else if blocks as you want. So you can use 1, 2, 3, as much as you want. And the else if always needs as well condition. It's like the if statement. And as well, of course, it is optional. So you don't have always to include it. So it is similar to the else, and as well, it cannot stand alone. So you cannot have an else if without an if statement. So those are the rules, of course, we have to practice. Okay, so now let's go and add our else if. Now you can see here we have like two blocks, the if and the else. In order to add else if, you have to add it in between. So you cannot add it at the start or at the end, you will get an error. So that's why we're going to go over here and say else if. And afterward, we have to go and add our condition, exactly like the if statements. So we're going to say the score is greater or equal to 80. So this is the condition, and if it is true, so we have to go and add the double points, don't forget about it. And then we hit enter. And as you can see, we are getting our indentations. So what's gonna happen? We're gonna go and print the grade B. And actually that's it. With that, we have now our two questions and we can try this out. So let's have the 100. You can see we are getting A. So Python is executing this print and everything else is ignored because the first condition is fulfilled. Let's go and try the 85. And execute it. You can see we are getting the B, and that's because the first condition did fail. That's why Python gonna try the second condition, and the second one with the else if it is true. That's why we are getting B. So that means the else if now is activated. Let's go and add the last one, the 50, and execute. You will see we are getting the grade if, and that's because this value did not fulfill any of our conditions. So that means we got false in all our conditions. That's why Python did execute the else statement. So as you can see, it's really simple to read. If this condition is true, then do this. Otherwise, go check another thing. If this is true, then do that. And if none of the above is working, just go to the else statements and execute this. So it makes sense and as well simple. Alright, now moving on to the next one, we can make branching on the conditional statements. We don't have for this like a new keyword or statements. It's all about using the else if multiple times. So let's understand what this means. Now, all what we're gonna do is to add another follow-up question. For example, is the score is higher or equal to 70? And we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna put it on the false path. So if the answer for the second question is false, go and ask a third question. And the same thing, either it's gonna be true or false. If it's true, then we add and assign the grade of C. And if it's false, then we go to the else. So as you can see, all what we are doing is we are asking another question if we are getting false. So by looking to this, you can see we can connect else if with another else if. Well, this is really useful in many scenarios where, for example, we are building this grading system, or we are assigning roles to the users, or maybe we are working with the codes of status. There are many scenarios where we have to change the different conditions using the else if. So for example, if the score is 100, the first condition is true. So with that, Python gonna go to the right side, assign the A, and skip then everything, jump immediately to the end. All the questions, everything on the left side gonna be ignored. So now if you have the score of the 85, the first condition is false. Then Python gonna go and ask the second question. It will be true. And with that, we will get B and immediately break the chain. So get out to the end. Now let's say the score is 70, the first condition is false, the second as well false, and now Python has to ask the last question. Is it equal or higher than 70? Well, yes. So that means it's gonna go to the path of the true and assign C without executing the else. And to the last example where we have 40. So the first question is false, the second as well false, and now Python gonna try the last question. Is it higher or equal to 70? Well, this is as well false. That's why nothing left, and Python has to go and execute the else because we didn't get any true to all our conditions. So with that, Python gonna assign F and jump out to the end. As you can see, we are covering 4 scenarios, 4 ways. But as we are using more and more else if, we are like branching to the left side. So visually, it looks like you have steps going down or like a waterfall. So you see, coding is not that dry, right? We have like a visual behind the code. There is always like a design. So now let's keep going. We're gonna go and add another block of the else if. So else if score is greater or equal to 70, then double points. If this is true, what can happen? We hit enter and print C. So now let's try this out. I'm gonna get the value 75 and execute it. You are getting now C. So what happens here? The first condition is not true. That's why Python is jumping to the second one. As well, this condition is not true. That's why it's gonna go and try the last one. This time the score 75 is greater than 70. That's why we are getting the C. But of course, if you go and do something below, like 50, none of the conditions is fulfilled. That's why Python is executing the else statements. As you can see now, you can go and keep adding stuff to our code. Like for example, if it is like 60 or above, then let's go and print D. So as you can see, we are like chaining the else if. This is how things works with those three conditions. So things are easy, right? Okay, now we're gonna talk about the nested if form. So the nested if is all about to put if statement inside another if statement. Now, as usual, we're gonna have a visual to understand it. Okay, so now let's say that we have a question, and as you can see, we used to add the questions always to the left side with the false path, where we use the else if. But now how about to add our follow-up question after the true? So we go to the right side and we ask it immediately after the true. Well, for that, we don't have dedicated statements like the else if. We have to go and reuse the if statements. And with that, we have like an if statement inside another one. That's why we call it nested if. So now what's gonna happen? We have to ask another question. For example, has the student submitted any projects? And for this question, we have either yes or no, true or false. If it's true, then this is really an excellent student and he or she gonna get A+. But now if it is false, this student's still good. So we still have like above 90. That's why we will get A. But for that to happen, we have to do exactly like the first if. We have to include an else for it. So this gets a little bit confusing. Each if statement has its own else statement. So the one that we have in the left on the bottom, it belongs to the first if. But the one with the A, it belongs only to the second if statement, to the nested one. So again, each time you start a new if statement, you can add to it an else. So now let's have an example. Let's say the student has 100 and as well he submitted a project. So we have true. So now Python gonna start with the first question. Is it higher than 90? Well, it is true. That's why Python gonna go to the right side and then ask the second follow-up question. Has the student submitted any project? Well, it is yes. Then it's gonna go to the right side and the student gonna get a perfect A+. And Python gonna go and break everything and go to the end. But now let's say that our student didn't submit any projects. So for the first question, we have true. But as Python gonna ask the follow-up question about the project, well, this time gonna get false. And Python has to go and execute the else of the second if statement. So this student gonna get an A and as well jump to the end. And of course, if the first condition is not met, then Python has always to go to the left side and ask the follow-up question like before. And with that, we can see we are covering now 5 different ways. And we are branching differently in the left side and on the right side. So we are forming something like a tree, right? We have branches on the left and as well to the right. And there is one thing that you have to be careful that with the conditional statement, there is only one path gonna be executed. So with this, my friend, you have like now full control on building complex and flexible logic inside your code. Okay, so now back to our code. Let's go and create a new variable submitted project. And let's assign to it the value true. So this is a Boolean value and we can go and ask a question about it inside our chain. Give an A+ if the student submitted as well a project. And we can go and ask this question inside the first block. So if the score is equal or higher than 90, then go and ask another question. And another question means we need another if statement. So if the submitted projects, now we don't have to go and add any operators. We will not do something like this, because it makes no sense. It's enough to say if submitted project like this. So if this returns true, then do something about it. As you can see, we don't have always to use the comparison operators. It's enough to use a Boolean expression. Anything that you have learned before, it could be a function, it could be like Boolean value, anything that returns true or false could be used after the if statements. So now if the second question as well true, what's gonna happen? We're gonna go and hit enter. And now as you can see, the indentations are 8 spaces. So that's Python knows whatever now I'm writing here, it belongs to the previous question. So this print actually belongs to this if statement and it doesn't belong to the first one, right? Now, if both are true, our student gonna get A+, and otherwise, So we have here an else, as you can see, then go and print A. But here we have an issue. This print now belongs to the else statements, and you have to go and give it a tab. So we need here 8 spaces in order for Python to understand, aha, this one belongs to this else and not to the previous one. So as you can see, the indentations are really important as you are building such kinds of logic. If you do it wrong, then you will get errors. Now let's go and try this out. For example, let's have like 95 and the project is submitted. If you go and execute it, you will get the A+, and that's because here the first condition is fulfilled and as well the second condition. That's why Python gonna go and execute the A+ and then jump outside the whole code. So nothing else can be evaluated at all. But if we have here like false, and execute it, Python gonna evaluate this one, it's gonna be true and go inside. So now for the second one, this one is false. That's why Python has to go and implement the else statement. And that means only this code is activated. Now, if you go and add this true here, and let's say we have, for example, 50, and you go and execute it, you will get an if. Because in our logic, it doesn't matter now whether you have true or false. This is actually only relevant for the first block. We are not asking this question afterward in the else if or the else. We are just checking the scores. So in this example, none of our conditions are fulfilled. That's why Python is printing if. So my friends, as you can see, we are nesting an if statement inside another if statement. And of course, you can keep nesting stuff. Like I can go over here and say if, like, I don't know, if true, and then double point, and then hit enter. So as you can see, we have an if inside another if inside another if. And with that, you can do nesting in Python. But of course, we don't want to do that here. So that's it. This is how we do the nested if. Okay, again, the same scenario. We have a new condition and it's always the question where to place it. Previously, we have learned how to put it as a follow-up question on the left side using the else if, and as well how to put it on the right side using a new if statement. But now we don't have always to have it as a follow-up condition. We can ask it at the same time with the first condition. So we're gonna put them together at the same level. And with that, we have to evaluate 2 conditions at the same time. But you know, we have to connect those 2 conditions using the logical operators and or. And of course, both of them has different behaviors. Like for example, the AND operator, it's gonna return true only if both of the conditions are true. So for example, if the first condition is true and the second one as well true, then this is going to be fine for the AND operator. And Python has to go to the right side to the true path and assign A and then go to the end. But now let's say that the first condition is true, but the second one is false. So the student didn't submit any projects. This is not okay for the AND operator. It expects both of the conditions to be true. So that's why Python going to go to the left side and execute the else statements. So the student going to fail. But now, of course, this makes no sense. This is really restrictive. Instead, we can go and use the OR operator. And here, at least one of the conditions should be true in order to get the result true. So now if you go and do it like this, the condition is fulfilled because we have one condition as true and Python gonna go to the right side instead and assign A to the grade. So now you have understanding why we have learned the Boolean expressions and the logical operators exactly to build this kind of logic. Okay, so now back to our example. And now let's focus on this part of code. Now using the nested if statement, it is usually hard to maintain and as well hard to read. And all what we are doing here is we are checking 2 conditions, the score and as well the submitted projects. Now instead of having it like this, we could do everything in one go. We can go and take this over here and put it side by side with the first condition. So with that, we can go and evaluate both of them, but of course we have to connect them using the logical operators. Now we're gonna say it like this. If the score is higher or equal to 90 and as well the project is submitted, then this student should get A+. So we can go get rid of this nested if and we don't need those 8 spaces. We can go back. So if this happens, the student gonna get an A+. But now what we're gonna do with this one here, we still need the A, right? But now we have to do something about this over here. We cannot have 2 else, right? We have now only one if and you are allowed only to use one else. And of course we want to use the last one. That's why we have to go and remove this. Now what we can do, we can go and use else if, and we have to specify the condition condition. So we're going to say again, if the score is higher or equal to 90, and after that double points, and of course here, what's going to happen, we're going to print the A, but we don't need 8 spaces, it's enough 4, so that we have everything at the same level. Now you might say, why we are not checking again the submitted projects? So why we are not doing something like this and not submitted projects, right? Well, we have checked this already at the start, so if it is not true, that means it is false, right? So to check again, it makes no sense, you have to remove it. So now of course we can go and test it. Let's go and have here 100, and the submitted project is false. Let's go and execute it. You will get A, and that's because the conditions over here is giving false. The score, yes, is over 100, but it's not enough. Both of them should be true. That's why this gonna fail, and Python gonna go to the second one. Now this time we have only one condition, it is true, and in this case we are sure the submitted project is false. That's why the print A gonna be executed. But now if you go and turn it to true and execute, you will get the A+, and that's because the first two conditions are giving true, and Python gonna go execute this one and jump immediately to the end of the chain. So nothing else gonna be executed over here. Now let's try one more thing. Let's say that our student has a score of 50, but our student did submit a project and it was successful. So it makes no sense to give this student an F. We could give this student a last chance by the last check. So we check if the score is higher or equal to 60, or let's say if our student did submit a project, then it's fine to give the student D. So if you go and execute it, you will get D here. So this time we are not giving our student an F because he submitted a project. So at this scenario, you have to go and use the OR operator like this. And the only way as a student to get an F, if your score is less than 60, and at the same time, you didn't submit a project. So you have here false. If you go and execute it, you will get an F. So there is no chance to help here. You have either to have a nice score in the exam or you submitted the project. So this is how we can ask two questions at the same time using the logical operators. Okay, now we have another type or form. We call it the independent if statements. So they are like separated checks that's going to be evaluated one by one, and they don't have like dependency between them. So let's see what this means. Okay, again, here we have our extra condition and we are wondering where we're going to place it. So far, we have learned how to position this question inside the same chain. So we are always putting the condition between the start and the end. Doesn't matter whether left, right, or at the start. But now we're going to break the chain and we're going to put our question completely outside. So that means once everything is done with the first if statement chain, we're going to go and add another new if statement. And they have nothing to do with each other. So that means now our second question is actually completely independent from the first question. So this is what we mean with the independent if statements. All right, so now let's try this independent if statements. Now we have two variables and I would like to check those informations separately. So now we start with the first if the score is higher than 90. Then we print, let's say, high score. Otherwise, if it is false, then we need an else and we print low score. So this is the first chain. It starts with the if and ends with the else. Now if you go after the else and you start a new if statement, it's going to be completely independent from the previous one. And as you can see, we are starting as well at the same level. So here I'm going to go and evaluate the submitted projects. And if it is true, then print project is submitted. And if it's false, so we need an else, print project is not submitted. So now let's check this. We have the score 50 and the project is not submitted. If you go and execute it, you can see now we are getting two results. Low score and the project is not submitted. Usually if you have like one chain, you get only one answer. And that's because Python is executing those if statements independently. So what happens here? Python gonna say, okay, we have here an if statements where we have a question. Well, it is not fulfilled. That's why it's gonna jump to the else statements and print low score. So that's it for the first chain and everything is done. And Python gonna see another if statement and say, how now we have a new chain, a new story. So it's gonna check, okay, is the submitted project equal to true? Well, it is false. That's why as well here, Python gonna go and jump to the else statements and print project is not submitted. So as you can see, those two if statements are separated and we don't have here any nested if statements. So there is no dependencies between them. And as well, if this means if we have here like a true, that doesn't mean that Python is gonna go and ignore the second chain. They have nothing to do with each other's. So this is how we can do independent if statements. Okay, so now it's challenge time and I have for you 2 challenges. The first one we're gonna do it together, but the second one you have to do it alone. So the first challenge is to validate the values of the emails. So we have to make quality checks in order to detect the issues. So the rules are like this: the email must not be empty, it must contain a dot and at, it must contain exactly one at symbol, the email must end with .com, .org or .net, and it must not be longer than 254 characters, and the last one, it must start or end with a letter or digit. So now pause the video, do it alone, and then we're gonna do it together. Alright, so now I hope that you are already done. Now I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it. Now first we need a variable, and let's start with an empty string like this. So now let's start with the first one. The email must not be empty. So that means we have to build a condition to check the values, and since this is the first condition, we start with the if. Now the condition is very simple. We're going to say if the email equal to double quotes without anything inside it, then this is going to be an issue, and we're going to go and print it to the output. So we're going to say the email cannot be empty. So this can happen if the email is empty. Otherwise, we're going to say else print the email is valid. So now let's go and try this out and execute. You can see the email cannot be empty, so we have here an issue. And if you go and add anything inside it, you will get the email is valid. Well, this is not really correct because we didn't apply all other rules. But now what could happen is that we could have like multiple spaces inside the email address, and this considered to be as well empty. We don't have any like real email. If you go and execute it, you're still gonna get the email is valid, but actually for us it is empty. Now how we're gonna fix it? Usually first we clean up the data before doing any checks. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna remove all the white spaces in our email and then start applying the checks. So we're gonna say first clean the string. So we're gonna do it like this: email is equal to email dot, and here we're gonna use the methods, remember, strip. So if you use it, you are removing the leading and the trailing spaces. So that means we are first cleaning the emails and then we are checking stuff. Let's go and try this out. Now you can see the email cannot be empty. That's because we remove the spaces and then this is equal to an empty string. Great. So with that, we are done with the first check. Let's go to the second one. The email must contain a dot and at. So that means we have to go and add another condition, another check. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna go and use the else if. So if it is not empty, then we have to check another thing. So let me just grab the comment over here. So now how we gonna do this? You remember we had like special operator in order to check the existence of string inside another string. So we use the in operator. So we're gonna say the dot in email and the other one gonna be at in email. So now let's go and add double points and we're gonna print email must contain dot and at. So now let's try this out. Let's have any email without a dot, or let's say at. So if we go and execute it, so now as you can see, this is not working. We are getting the email is valid. Well, we have something wrong with this condition, right? Now what this condition is returning is dot in email, so this is false, and at in email, this is as well false. But actually what we need to get it true at the output. So we're gonna go and reverse everything with the not operator. So with that we are saying, if this rule is not true, then we have an issue, right? So now if you go and execute it, you will get the issue. Email must contain dot and at. Now if I go and add only the at, let's go and try this out. You can see we still are getting the issue, but if I go and add now the dot and execute, the email is valid. So again, what happens here? Dot in email, this is true, and at in email, this is a second true. We are using the AND operator, so the whole thing gonna return true, but as we convert it to not, the condition is not fulfilled and Python will not print it. So with that, Python gonna go to the else and print email is valid. So with that, we have solved this check. Let's move to the next one. The email must contain exactly one at. So that means we have to go and add another check using the else if. Now it must contain exactly one at symbol. So how are we gonna solve it? We have to go and count how many at we have in our email. And if it is exactly one, then it's fine. And remember, for that, we have a method called count. So we're gonna say email dot count. What we are counting the at, right? So if this is not equal to 1, then we have an issue. So we're gonna say email must contain exactly one at. So let's go and try this out. Now we have only one at. So if you go and execute it, you will get the email is valid. But now let's say that I have here another at in my email. If you go and execute it, you will get this issue. Email must contain exactly one at, because the count of this is going to be 2 and 2 is not equal to 1. So this is correct. That's why we are getting this message. Okay, so as you can see, things are really easy. Let's keep going. Another check. So we are checking the email must end with .com, .org or .net. So another else if email. So now how are we going to solve it? We have to check the end of the string. So the end of the email must match one of those values, right? So for that, you remember we have a special method to check the end of the string. So it is ends with. We have to pass for it a value. And we're going to say here .com. And then we can say or, and the whole thing again for the .org. And of course we have to go and repeat that for the .net. Well, this is gonna work, but we have some smarter solution for it by using the sets. I know we didn't talk about it yet, but it is not bad to see how those stuff works here. So we're just gonna make like a sequence of string values separated with a comma. So .org and as well .net. So now if the email ends with those stuff, everything gonna be fine, but we are not checking whether everything is fine. We are checking the opposite. So that's why we're going to go and add a not. And then we're going to say print email must end with .com, .org or .net like this. So now for this example, if you go and execute it, it will be bad because we still have an at. So let me just remove it. Then again, you can see the email is valid. So we are good with all those checks. But now if you have something like this .io and execute it, you will get an issue. Email must end with .com, .org or .net. And this comes exactly from this check. Okay, so let's keep going. The next one, the email must not be longer than 254 characters. So another else if. So it's not longer. So we have to calculate how many characters we have inside our emails, right? And you remember we have a built-in function, really nice one. So the length of the email. And with that, we're going to get exactly how long is our email. And we're going to say the result must not be greater than 254 like this. And if this happens, then we have an issue. The email must not be longer than 254 characters. So now let me just remove this and execute it. We will not catch this error because it is less than 254. But if you go now and write a big email with all those characters, you will get the issue. So it is very simple. Let's go to the last one. This is going to be interesting one. So the last check, the last else if. So what do I have here? The email must start and end with a letter or digit. So that means we have to go and check the first character and the last character of my email. They could be only letters or numbers. We cannot have special characters. So now in order to get the first character, you remember, we have to go and use the index. So the index of the first character is email. And then we have 0 over here. And the last one, of course, you cannot go and start counting the index of the last character like this because each email has like different length. But instead we count from the right side. And remember, we use the negative values, the -1. And now one more thing, we're gonna go and add an and in between, but still we need some kind of function or method, right, to validate this. And in Python we have a special method called is_alNum. So this one is gonna check whether the string value is alphanumeric. So it contains only letters or digits. If yes, then we're gonna get true. Otherwise, we're gonna get false. So it is really nice. We didn't learn about this before. This is the first time we talk about it. So we're gonna have this check on the first character and the last character. And of course, we're gonna put everything between not. So we are saying if this is not following our rule, then of course we have an issue. So we're gonna say print email must start and end with a letter or digit. Now, as you can see, everything is okay. But if you go, for example, at the start, and let's have like a minus, let's go and execute. You can see we are getting an error because the first character is actually a special character. That's why we are getting the issue. Let's go and try the end. I'm gonna go and have hash. Let's execute. Surprise, surprise, we are getting something else. The email must end with .com, .org, and .net. And this is really nice because Python gonna execute this one over here and then stops. So that means the other data qualities will not be checked actually. So now here we have like a decision to make. Do we want our code to stop checking once we find the first issue? Or we would like to see all the issues inside our code? Well, currently our design gonna stop once we encounter the first issue. But now if you say, you know what, I would like to have a quality check to see all the issues, then you cannot go and use the else if. You have to go and use the independent if statements for each check. So now what we can do, we can go over here and convert everything to the if. And as well over here, you can of course do find and replace. So now if you go and execute, we will get both of the issues. The email must not end with .com, .org, .net, and the email must start and end with a letter and digit. So this is really nice. And as you can see now, we are understanding why we have those different designs, right? Now we can go and add like a third issue, for example, 2 outs, and execute. With that, we are getting now 3 issues in the output. So with that, we are getting a full report about the issues of our email. And here we have like small issue where the last else is actually not for everything. It is only for the last if statements. So now if you want to have this else, you have to include it in each if statement, or you can go and simply remove it like this. Or another solution, if you would like to really to have this else that everything is fine, what we can do, we can introduce a new variable, like let's call it valid and it is equal to true. And now what we can do, if we encounter any issues, we're gonna make this valid is equal to false. So we are printing and at the same time, we are changing the flag. So we're gonna go and add this everywhere where we have an issue. And as well over here. And the last one, but here we don't use actually an else. What we're gonna do, we're gonna use an if statement in order to check this flag at the end. So that means if this value is true, then go and print the email is valid. Let's try this out and execute it. Now, as you can see, we are not getting the email is valid because everything is really crazy here. Let's go and have another clean one and then execute. You can see the email is valid, and that's because everything did return false and none of them got executed. So the value inside the valid is actually coming from the first one here. So it's gonna stay true and none of our condition did convert it to false. With that, you are getting this nice message at the end, the email is valid. Alright my friends, I know that was not part of the task, but it was interesting how to solve it. And now we're gonna move to the second challenge. So now you have to check the quality of the passwords. So here are the rules. The password cannot be empty. The password must be at least 8 characters long, and it must include at least 1 uppercase letter and 1 lowercase letter. Another one, the password must not be same as the email address. So this is gonna be a weak password if you do that. And the password must not contain any spaces. So 1 space, multiple spaces, tabs. And the last rule, the password must contain only letters or digits. So good luck with that. Now pause the video and go solve this challenge. So if you liked this video and you would like to have more free content like this, then support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting. This really can help the channel to grow and to reach others like you. So thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video.